The Kia Sportage is a huge success story for the brand in Australia, and there's a lot to like about this vehicle. So is it going to be the right family SUV for you? Well, that's going to depend on which one you pick, and I'm going to tell you my picks in this review, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying what you're seeing so far. Please, if you haven't already, hit like and subscribe and the bell so you can keep up to date with all of my review content. There's a lot more coming. If you want a Kia Sportage, there are 11 different iterations of this SUV that you can choose from, and 2 of them are manual. Yep, manual in 2023. You wouldn't have thought it, would you? Now, the entry-level version is available in 3 different trim grades. That's the entry-level engine. Then there's a turbo-petrol engine with all-wheel drive with 2 trim grades, and then the diesel engine with all-wheel drive, which is the one I think you should choose, is the top-end offering, and it has 4 different versions available. It is an extensive range. There are a lot of options to choose from, but I'm going to tell you my 2 picks in this lineup. The entry-level version, the cheaper, more affordable one, would be the SX Plus Petrol. You'll see the price for it on your screen now. It adds a few extras over this one, which is the SX, and it looks a little bit nicer because it's got different wheels as well. I would also suggest that the SX Plus Diesel with all-wheel drive would be a great option if you don't want to spend all the extra money and wait all the extra time for a GT line, because there are still extensive wait periods on the GT line grade. So SX Plus seems like the right spec for this if it's the right car for you. It's a mid-size SUV, so there are some familiar alternatives when it comes to the Kia Sportage. So obviously the first one that I always suggest is the Toyota RAV4. If you don't want to wait for your SUV though, it might not be right for you. There are huge wait lists still for that model, particularly the hybrid versions, but there are some pretty good petrol versions if that interests you. So maybe keep your options open if you aren't necessarily sold on the whole idea of a hybrid. Another alternative that is very, very similar to this is the Hyundai Tucson. Now you can watch my review, hit the link up there and you'll be taken to that full detailed review across the entire range of the Tucson. And just like this car, there are some models in that lineup that I wouldn't necessarily choose if I was buying one. So I'd love to know which one you would pick if you were choosing a Tucson. Hit me up in the comments. And the third option that I would suggest is the GWM Haval H6 Hybrid. It's very important. The hybrid part is very important in that sentence because it is the one that you should choose if you are looking at a H6. The other versions with the 2-litre engine and the dual clutch automatic aren't very, very nice to drive, but the H6 hybrid does have a better powertrain and it is a bit more livable when it comes to drivability. So I would suggest have a look at it. Did you know that in Australia we get the big version of the Sportage? In other markets there is a smaller version with a shorter wheelbase and a smaller body that isn't quite as practical as this. But this is a pretty large mid-size SUV by today's standards. It's more than 4.6 meters long, and it does have a lot of space on the inside. I'll show you that in the next section of this video, but first I want to show you the boot because there's a bit to talk about here too. The Sportage has one of the bigger boots in the mid-size SUV segment at 543 litres, which is very large, and it also has a very wide opening to allow easy access for when you're loading in a pram or luggage or whatever it may be. It's a big boot, and it's also got a space saver, full-size spare under the floor, which is unusual in this size and type of SUV. So that's a nice thing to have, especially if you live in the country and you're getting flat tires regularly, as a lot of people are these days. It's also got these little storage areas at the back here, which aren't netted or anything like they are in some other models, but there's also these little hooks, so you can hook your shopping bag there and things won't move around. Pretty neat, I reckon. The interior of the new generation Sportage does feel like a new generation SUV. It's got these big displays up here. So you've got your touchscreen here and your digital display as well for your instruments. And it is a really high-tech feeling cabin. And I love the fact that it does have such intuitive controls, even if they are like a mini touchscreen. So there's this little section down here. You still have dials and knobs, which I really like, but there's also this little toggle switch here so you can go between between your media controls, your sat nav and that sort of stuff if your car has sat nav, and then you've also got your fan controls. So I think that it is a pretty clever setup and a pretty clever approach to not having to do everything through the big screen. Now, this spec is one of the lower grades, as I mentioned. What isn't as appealing about this sort of spec is that there are all these blanks around the place. So there's 5 little blank plates here, and that just detracts from the ambience a little bit. And also I will say that it is a bit of a festival of black plastic in here. It isn't necessarily the most amazing feeling cabin when it comes to the finishes, but there is at least a little bit of this brushed metallic looking plastic here and some chrome around the vents and that as well. So it isn't the most black cabin, but it could do with just a little bit more something in terms of the design in here. You've got these cloth seats in this trim. Obviously the higher grade models get leather as well. There's no seat heating in this trim. Spend more for that if you want it. When it comes to storage, there's plenty in here. You've got a storage section in front of the shifter. Some grades get a wireless charger. This one doesn't. There's a pair of cup holders here which are adjustable. I really like that they've got these little levers so you can press these buttons and they pop out and turn into cup holders. So if you want to have that as a storage space or cup holders, you can choose. There's a decent sized center console bin and you've got bottle holders in the doors as well. So it is a pretty practical upfront experience. Let's check out the back seat. Heaps of space back here in the rear seat of the Kia Sportage. This seat's set for me at 182 centimeters or 6 foot tall. And I've got heaps of knee room, lots of foot room, and there's plenty of practicality when it comes to the back seat space as well. You've got mat pockets on both of the seat backs, directional air vents. This grade doesn't get USB chargers in the back, some other grades do. You've got bottle holders in the doors. There's a flip down armrest here as well with cup holders too, which is nice. And if you have kids, there are ISOFIX points in the window seats. You'll easily fit either a forward or rearward facing child seat in here. It's a very, very accommodating back seat, and you've got 3 top tethers on the seat back as well. So this is a really, really practical mid-size SUV. If you've got a family that's maybe growing, maybe you've got one and you're expecting another, this could be a really good choice for you. As I mentioned, 3 different engine options in the Sportage lineup. This one here is the entry-level petrol version. It is a 2-litre 4-cylinder non-turbocharged petrol engine, and it's front-wheel drive and has a 6-speed automatic, or as I mentioned, 2 versions are available with a 6-speed manual transmission, which is pretty cool, although I wouldn't pick this engine if I was you. The next step up is the turbocharged 1.6-litre 4-cylinder petrol engine. Now, as I mentioned, there's 2 grades available with that one, and it comes with a 7-speed dual-clutch automatic transmission and all-wheel drive. Now, it is a pretty perky engine at speed, but at lower speeds, it can be really frustrating because the dual-clutch isn't fantastic. And my pick of the Sportage engine lineup is the 2-litre turbo diesel. It has heaps of power and torque for an application like this, and it has an 8-speed automatic and all-wheel drive. So it would be the one I would pick if I was buying a Sportage. Now, I lived with a 1.6-litre turbo version of the Sportage GT line. Hit the link at the top of your screen there and you'll be able to go and check out my video review of that car, and you'll see why I wouldn't suggest that one. Oh, should also mention that there is a hybrid version of the Sportage coming in 2024. So if you think hybrid is right for you, then it might be worth waiting for. Let's start off with the engine in this particular Sportage. This is the 2-litre version, so the non-turbocharged petrol model, and it's the SX grade. So it has, I would say, enough power in some situations, but not enough in others. And especially when you load up this car with a car full of people and stuff, you will notice that the engine does struggle a little bit. It's just not zesty enough, just doesn't have enough torque, really, in my opinion, to be suitable for this sort of application. It's just like the Tucson 2-litre engine and even the CX-5 2-litre engine. None of them really make effortless driving when it comes to power and torque delivery. That said, it is adequate if you are very light on the throttle. If you're not the sort of person who's always in a hurry, then you're not going to find this car frustrating. But if you are, yeah, you might hate it. At least this engine, anyway. The 6-speed auto in this 2-litre version, it's okay. It's just very busy because it doesn't have enough torque from the engine to work with. So when you go up and down hills, you will notice that it's always shifting back, you know, 6th, 5th, 4th, and then back to 5th, then back to 4th. So it's just not as good as it could be. This is why I would suggest that if you're shopping for a Sportage and you aren't on a super tight budget, then you should probably avoid the 2-litre front-wheel drive version. Okay, so the other engines in the lineup, the 1.6-litre petrol turbo, it is definitely a better fit in terms of power and torque. It's just that the transmission, it's a 7-speed dual clutch auto in that car, is not great. It's quite lurchy and laggy. So like old DSG transmissions in old Volkswagens, you do have that moment where it's like a shuddering hesitation when you take off from a standstill. And it's not as clever as it could be either. It sort of is a bit busier than it should be. So I don't love that engine and transmission. And I think the best engine and transmission in the Sportage range, as I've already said, is the 2-litre diesel turbo engine. It has easily enough power and torque for this application. It just makes a more effortless and more enjoyable drive experience in the Sportage. So it has an 8-speed automatic transmission, which allows the engine to use its torque to do the job that it needs to do. And it is a really pleasant powertrain. Definitely the pick, if you ask me. I can't wait to see if the hybrid version of the Sportage is one that I would recommend. Stay tuned, I will do a review of that car later. When it comes to the other elements of the drive experience, the ride is pretty comfortable. It's not the most comfortable SUV in terms of ride comfort and compliance, but it does sort of just deal with lumps and bumps in the road pretty well. It's just a little bit firm, I suppose you might say. And this is because this version is riding on 18-inch wheels. There is a version with 17s with even higher profile tires, which is the most comfortable version of this car. So if you are focused on that being a key criteria for you, check out the base model car. As for the steering, it hasn't had the Australian tune that we so often see from Kia models. And I don't think that's necessarily a big deal here because it's light enough and accurate enough in terms of the steering response. And when it comes to doing a parking job, let's just do one while we're here. Just reverse in. Easy peasy. This is a nicely weighted steering action, and it really does make for a pretty easy SUV to live with in urban situations and on the highway too. It's pretty well controlled in those sorts of situations too. I reckon you could do a lot worse than a Kia Sportage when it comes to the drive experience. However, I still reckon you should be buying the 2-litre diesel engine if you can afford it. When it comes to efficiency for the Sportage, well, the entry-level version is relatively efficient on paper at least. There's a manual and automatic combined cycle figure that you'll see on your screen now. If you're wondering what I've seen across this week of testing with this 2-litre auto version, you'll see that on your screen now. And look, I think that's okay. It's not necessarily the best, but it's certainly suitable for this sort of family device. Then the turbo-petrol version, it is a downsized engine with turbocharging, so you would expect that it is a little bit better on fuel consumption, and it is, just a bit, but I would say that you can more realistically rely on seeing something about 20% higher than that, based on my real-world testing in the GT line version that I drove when I was reviewing it for Cars Guide over months. So yeah, I was up around 9 litres per 100 for most of the time in that car. And then there's the diesel version, which has an official figure of 6.3 litres per 100 Ks, which is very good and mostly pretty replicable as well. You might see more like 7.5 litres per 100 in real world driving, especially if you're heavy on the throttle, but I reckon it's pretty respectable. The Kia Sportage was awarded the maximum 5-star ANCAP safety rating in 2022, so it does have heaps of active safety technology as standard. All models come with AEB, or autonomous emergency braking, with pedestrian and cyclist and junction detection, so it'll stop the car if it thinks you're going to jump in front of a car and you're not going to make the gap. which is pretty neat technology. There's also lane keeping assistance and blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert as well. Now, if you choose a manual version, you don't get the rear cross traffic alert that'll brake for you. So if that matters to you, then buy the auto. And there's also some extra technology if you buy the high-spec GT line version. You get a surround view camera, and you also get a blind spot view monitor. So it'll show up a little vision of what's happening in your blind spots on the instrument cluster for you to look at. So it is a nice little bit of technology. All models come with a reversing camera and rear parking sensors. If you choose the base model, you only get rear sensors. Any model above that, you get front parking sensors as well. And when it comes to airbag coverage, there's plenty. You've got dual front side, full length curtain, and a front center airbag as well. So safety, tick. Buy a Kia and you get a 7-year unlimited kilometre warranty, which is better than most of the mainstream brands. You also get 7 years of cap price servicing, but depending on which model you choose, the kilometre duration is different. So if you choose the turbo-petrol model, it's got shorter service intervals of 12 months and 10,000 kilometres, whereas if you choose the non-turbo petrol or the turbo diesel, the intervals are every 15,000 Ks. So it is a little bit more convenient to buy anything but the turbo petrol version when it comes to maintenance. Anyway, you should also note that the service costs, as you'll see on your screen now, are different between the 3 different grades as well. And remember, if you do a lot of Ks and you buy the turbo petrol, it's going to cost you more because you have to keep going back more often. There's also up to 8 years of roadside assist included for the Sportage. If you're after a really good SUV for you and your family, then the Kia Sportage should be on your shopping list, although I still reckon there are only 2 versions that I would choose, but I'd love to know which one you would pick. Hit me up in the comments section below, and if you haven't already, please do hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.